Okay, so you know how we always talk about things that can increase our risk of cancer?
Right.
Well, this one might really make you stop and think.
Yeah.
It turns out that alcohol, something so many of us, encounter all the time,
Hmm.
whether we drink it ourselves or not, is actually classified as a group 1 carcinogen.
Wow.
And that puts it in the same category as some really, really serious stuff, like tobacco and asbestos.
I mean, that definitely changes your perspective when you hear it like that.
Yeah, for a lot of our listeners out there, this might be brand new information.
It is for a lot of people.
So that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Absolutely.
This link between alcohol and cancer.
Yeah.
And we're going to be using some really interesting research to kind of break it all down.
Important research.
So in this deep dive, we want to understand a couple of key things.
Okay.
First, what's the actual connection between drinking alcohol and cancer risk?
Right.
Which types of cancers are most affected?
Yeah.
And then finally, and this is the most important part, what can you actually do with this knowledge?
So people can take action.
Exactly. So the research we're looking at today comes from a study that was published back in September 2021 in the journal Nutrients. And this research was done by the IRC.
The International Agency for Research on Cancer.
Exactly. And they're part of the World Health Organization.
Right.
And they're really considered like the leading experts when it comes to identifying cancer hazards.
Yes, their findings carry a lot of weight.
So let's jump right into it.
Yeah.
So this study found that 4% of all cancers globally are actually because of alcohol.
That is a huge number.
4%.
Yeah, think about it. That's 1 in every 25 cancer cases.
Worldwide.
Globally.
That is a lot.
It is. And to put an even finer point on that, that's over 740,000 new cancer cases.
In just 2020.
In a single year.
That's incredible.
So this isn't a small problem.
No, and it's not just this general link between alcohol and cancer.
Right.
The study also went deeper and identified the top 4 cancers.
The ones most strongly linked to alcohol.
Yeah. So the first one might surprise you.
Okay.
It's esophageal cancer.
Esophageal.
Where 26% of cases were linked to alcohol.
26%.
And you know what's interesting?
What about that?
That's actually a stronger connection than with liver cancer.
Which is really interesting because, most people, when they think about alcohol and cancer,
you think about the liver.
they immediately think of liver cancer.
Yeah, but it turns out esophageal cancer is even more strongly linked.
More strongly linked to alcohol, yeah.
So after esophageal cancer, we have liver cancer at 21%.
Okay.
And this is the one that's really concerning.
Yeah.
Breast cancer comes in at 13%.
And that's a big deal.
Huge deal.
Because breast cancer is the most common cancer in women worldwide.
Right. So this connection between alcohol and breast cancer.
It's really crucial for people to be aware of.
Especially for women.
Yeah.
And then rounding out the top 4
Okay.
is colon cancer at 12%.
Colon cancer.
So the impact of alcohol isn't just limited to 1 or 2 types of cancer.
Right.
It affects a whole bunch of different areas of the body.
It's a broad impact.
So one thing that I found really fascinating is that the study authors actually talked about how there's this lack of awareness.
A lack of public awareness.
About alcohol as a carcinogen.
Compared to something like tobacco.
Compared to tobacco, exactly.
Yeah, we all know.
Everybody knows.
Smoking is bad for you.
Right?
It causes lung cancer.
Right.
But the link between alcohol and cancer just isn't as widely known.
Yeah, and I wonder why that is.
Well, it could be because public health campaigns have been so successful
with smoking
at highlighting the dangers of smoking.
Yeah.
And maybe there just hasn't been that same level of, sustained
public awareness
and impactful communication around alcohol.
Yeah.
And I think it's also complicated by the fact that alcohol plays such a complex role in our society.
Socially.
In our culture.
Culturally, yeah, for sure.
It's part of many people's lives.
Right.
In many different ways.
And, it gets even more complicated and more worrying when you think about the combined effects of alcohol and tobacco.
Right, if you use both.
Because the study found that using both together dramatically increases your risk.
Yeah, it's not just a simple addition.
It's not 1 + 1 = 2.
It's more like a multiplier effect.
It really amplifies your risk.
Yeah, the risks compound each other.
So we've talked about, the scale of the issue.
Right.
We've talked about the types of cancers that are most affected. But now I want to get into the nitty-gritty, the detail.
The biological process.
Yeah, what's actually happening in our bodies.
Yeah, like how is alcohol actually contributing to cancer at a cellular level?
Right, so let's break down those mechanisms.
Okay.
So one of the primary ways is through this substance called acetaldehyde.
Acetaldehyde.
And acetaldehyde is formed when our body breaks down alcohol.
Okay.
It's like the first byproduct of alcohol metabolism.
So every time you have a drink,
your body's producing this substance.
Yeah, and the problem with acetaldehyde
What's the problem?
is that it's toxic. It can actually damage our DNA.
And DNA is like
the instruction manual for our cells.
Yeah.
And not only can it damage our DNA, it also interferes with our body's ability to repair that damage.
Oh, so it's a double whammy.
It is.
Okay, so that's acetaldehyde.
That's one key mechanism.
What else is going on?
So another big factor is oxidative stress.
Oxidative stress.
And that basically means that when we drink alcohol, it leads to the creation of these unstable molecules called free radicals.
Free radicals?
And you can think of free radicals kind of like these tiny little wrecking balls.
Wrecking balls.
Bouncing around in your body.
A good way to put it.
They bump into things and cause damage.
Damage cells.
Damage cells, damage DNA.
And this damage over time can lead to cancer.
Exactly.
So we've got acetaldehyde.
Right.
We've got oxidative stress.
Mm-hmm.
What else did the study highlight?
Well, there's also the issue of nutrient absorption.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
So alcohol can actually interfere with your body's ability to absorb certain nutrients.
Okay.
And one of the most important ones is folate.
Folate.
Which you might also know as vitamin B9.
Okay.
And folate is crucial for healthy DNA.
So if you're not absorbing enough folate,
it makes it harder for your body to repair and synthesize DNA properly.
Which can lead to more errors.
And those errors can increase the risk of cancer.
Okay, and what about hormones?
Yeah, hormones are another important piece of the puzzle.
Because I think the study mentioned that alcohol can mess with our hormone balance.
It can, especially if you're a heavy drinker.
Okay.
It can disrupt that balance.
And how does that relate to cancer?
Well, one example is that alcohol can increase estrogen levels in women.
Estrogen?
And elevated estrogen is a known risk factor for certain types of cancer.
Like breast cancer.
Exactly.
So it's not just direct damage to the cells.
Right.
It's also messing with the whole environment inside the body.
Creating conditions
that can make cancer more likely.
Exactly.
And I think the study also talked about how alcohol affects the immune system.
Right, our body's natural defense system.
So if you drink a lot,
your immune system can become suppressed.
And that makes you more vulnerable to all sorts of things.
To infections, to diseases.
And to cancer.
Yes, because a weakened immune system is less effective at fighting off abnormal cells.
Including cancer cells.
Right, so alcohol can actually reduce the activity of natural killer cells.
Natural killer cells.
And those are like the body's security guards.
They're constantly patrolling.
Looking for and eliminating potentially cancer cells.
Wow, and I remember learning that alcohol also increases inflammation.
Yes, chronic inflammation.
And that's linked to a whole host of health problems.
And cancer is definitely one of them.
Right, so long-term inflammation
from regular alcohol use
can actually damage tissues
and create an environment where cancer cells can thrive.
So just to recap what we've learned from this IRC study, we're talking about DNA damage from that nasty acetaldehyde, cellular damage from oxidative stress,
those wrecking ball free radicals.
Right, then we've got problems with nutrient absorption, like with folate.
Yeah.
We've got hormonal disruptions.
Leading to things like increased estrogen.
Increased estrogen.
Right.
Yep. And then we have a weakened immune system.
Making it harder for your body to defend itself.
And then to top it all off, chronic inflammation.
Creating a fertile ground for cancer cells.
It really does sound like a full-on assault on the body.
It does.
But, you know, like with all research,
and of course,
this study did have some limitations.
Right. And it's always important to acknowledge those limitations.
And be transparent.
Exactly. So one of the challenges that the researchers pointed out is that it's really hard to completely separate the effects of alcohol and smoking.
Because people who smoke often drink.
And vice versa.
So it's hard to tease out
the independent effects of each one.
Right. And I imagine there's also the issue of underreporting.
Yeah, when you're relying on people to self-report how much they drink.
You never know if you're getting the full picture.
People might not remember accurately.
Or they might be embarrassed to say how much they actually drink.
Exactly.
And I think this study also mentioned something about genetic variations.
Yeah, that's a really interesting aspect.
Tell me more about that.
So basically, how our bodies process alcohol can vary from person to person.
Okay.
And this is due to genetic differences.
Okay.
And these differences can actually influence your risk of developing cancer.
Oh, wow.
So for example, some East Asian populations have genetic variations that cause them to metabolize alcohol more slowly, which means they might have a buildup of acetaldehyde.
That toxic substance?
Exactly.
So their risk might be different.
Compared to other populations.
Okay, so genetics plays a role.
It does.
And were there any types of cancers where the link with alcohol is still kind of unclear?
Yeah, the researchers did mention that while we've made a lot of progress in understanding how alcohol contributes to many cancers,
Okay.
there are still some cancers, like stomach cancer,
Stomach cancer.
where the mechanisms aren't fully understood.
So more research is needed.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've talked about the risks, the mechanisms, the limitations of the research.
Yeah.
But now let's shift gears and talk about what you, the listener, can actually do with this information.
Yeah, action steps.
Right, because it can feel a bit overwhelming.
It can.
When you hear about all these scary things.
Yeah, but the good news is...
There is good news.
There is. We're not powerless.
We have agency.
We do.
So what's the most important thing people can do?
Well, the most straightforward thing is to reduce or, if possible, eliminate alcohol altogether.
Completely cut it out.
If you can.
And I know that sounds really drastic for some people.
It does, but the research shows
that even light drinking
has been linked to an increased risk of certain cancers.
Like breast cancer.
And colorectal cancer.
So even if you're not a heavy drinker.
It's still worth considering reducing your intake.
And what about those situations, like social gatherings?
Right, where drinking is often expected.
Yeah, where it's like the norm.
Yeah, well, there are tons of great alternatives out there.
Like what?
So you could explore the world of mocktails.
Mocktails.
You could have sparkling water with some fresh fruit.
That sounds refreshing.
Or you could try some of the non-alcoholic beers and wines.
Oh, yeah. Those are becoming more and more popular.
They are.
And they taste pretty good.
They do.
So you can still enjoy the social aspect.
Without the added cancer risk.
Exactly. And if someone is a smoker,
right,
then it sounds like reducing alcohol is even more important.
It is, because remember those combined effects?
That multiplier effect.
Exactly. They really amplify the risk.
Okay, so we talked about how alcohol can interfere with the absorption of folate.
Right, that important nutrient for DNA health.
So what can people do about that?
Well, you can make sure you're eating plenty of folate-rich foods.
Like?
Leafy green vegetables.
Like spinach.
Spinach, kale.
Yeah.
Beans and lentils. Right. Oranges and other citrus fruits.
Citrus fruits.
And a lot of cereals are fortified with folate.
Fortified with folate.
So those are all good options.
And I know we also talked about how alcohol weakens the immune system.
It does.
So are there any general lifestyle recommendations to boost the immune system?
Yes, definitely.
Like what?
So getting enough sleep.
Sleep is so important.
It is.
A balanced diet.
Lots of fruits and vegetables.
Lots of fruits and vegetables and regular exercise.
All of those things can help strengthen your immune system.
And a strong immune system is better able to fight off cancer.
Exactly.
So just being aware of this link between alcohol and cancer
is a huge first step.
It is.
And then, once you're aware,
share it with others.
Talk to your friends, your family.
Spread the word.
Spread the word, exactly, because a lot of people just don't know.
And, we can even take it a step further.
Okay.
And think about advocating for change at a community level.
At a broader level.
Yeah. So what would that look like?
Well, you could encourage workplaces to host more alcohol-free events.
Alcohol-free events, yeah.
Or you could encourage your local community groups to do some educational campaigns.
About the risks of alcohol.
About alcohol and cancer specifically.
And I guess you could also support policies that encourage moderation.
Yes. Policies that promote responsible drinking.
And even on an individual level, just setting small goals to reduce your intake can make a difference.
Absolutely.
So what would be a good starting point?
Well, you could start with 1 or 2 alcohol-free days per week.
Just 1 or 2.
And then gradually increase that over time.
As you get more comfortable.
Exactly.
Small changes.
Can lead to big results.
And for women in particular,
right.
Given that link between alcohol and breast cancer,
yeah.
Are there any specific things they should keep in mind?
Yes, I would definitely recommend talking to your doctor about breast cancer screening.
Okay.
Especially if you drink alcohol regularly.
Early detection is key.
It is.
So the big takeaway here.
The bottom line
is that alcohol is a group 1 carcinogen.
Right up there with tobacco and asbestos.
It increases your risk of several major cancers.
And we've talked about all the ways that it does that.
The mechanisms, the biological processes.
Yeah.
But the good news is
we have the power to make choices.
To reduce our risk.
Exactly.
So to our listeners out there, we want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What's one small change you can make this week?
Yeah.
Maybe it's trying a non-alcoholic drink at your next social gathering.
That's a great idea.
Or maybe it's just sharing this information with someone you care about.
Raising awareness.
What's one small step you can take?
And remember, here at Boost GB,
We're all about taking complex research
and making it simple,
easy to understand,
actionable,
because we believe that everyone should have access to this information
to make informed decisions about their health.
Exactly. So if you want to stay up to date on the latest health research
and learn about more topics like this,
be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter
at boostgb.com.
That's a great resource.
We break down the science
in a way that's easy to digest,
so you can stay informed and empowered.
Thanks for listening.
And we'll see you next time.